one of the things I'd love to, talk about is a lot of people are like, yes, I get what AWBI is doing and Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative is doing, and this work is really important. But why Black wealth? Why Black, right? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Black Wealth Unlocked. My name is Dr. Janelle Williams, co-founder and CEO of Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, a catalytic nonprofit committed to building collective Black wealth. And today it's my pleasure to be joined by Dr. Alex Camardelle, Vice President of Policy and Research. Welcome to Black Wealth Unlocked, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So before we delve into all things policy and research, let's start off by really learning more about you, Alex. Yeah. Who are you? What inspires you? What brings you the greatest joy?
Sure. Okay. I'll start with what brings me the greatest joy, and that's water, beaches, music, live music, concerts, things that are interactive, travel, things that help me escape. I am... like doing unserious things as well, because I spend a lot of my career doing very serious work. Yeah. I've spent the last, decade and some focused primarily on economic issues that are linked to addressing racial disparities, and it is deeply tiring work sometimes. So I have to, focus on those things that bring me joy. So I'm really glad you asked me that question, because I definitely seek out joy as much as possible. Like you mentioned, I'm VP of Policy and Research at the Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative. I lead what we call our Black Community Wealth Institute, which is our ideas pillar at AWBI. And we generate insights that are meant to inform discussions on how we can close the racial wealth divide and ultimately build Black wealth. Prior to that, I was working in the think tank space in DC for several years, advocating on behalf of Black communities. I was working in the state of Georgia doing similar work under a broader bucket of economic mobility issues. I spent time working in philanthropy with my former boss and now current partner in crime, and also did work in the education policy space. So I've made quite the progression in my career to end up in a world of work that's dedicated to wealth building. And I'm just happy to be in this place. It seems like it's been a natural progression for me.
That's wonderful. And as we think about all these amazing accolades and accomplishments that Alex has achieved, please share with our viewers, who's your favorite artist?
My favorite musical artist is Beyonce Giselle Knowles-Carter. She is, in my opinion, one of the most talented artists that we have on the planet right now.
Yes.
And she's asking me that because we joke constantly about Beyonce. And,
yes.
It's actually what, her music inspires our mood in our work a lot too, especially right now.
Exactly.
With the Renaissance World Tour going on and everything.
Yes. Renaissance is an act of joy and resistance. And so Beehive and Beyonce, if you're watching Black Wealth Unlocked, we certainly are fans. Join the movement. So we're here today to talk about some really broad topics, right? Clustered around policy and research. And we hear those words and we're like, yes, we think that's important, but what it means, why it's important, they're still very vague to us. And so I think it's really important that Alex is here with us today to really talk about why policy and research helps to transform not just our economic landscape, but really protect our freedom as a democracy. And in a sector, a nonprofit sector in particular, Alex, we see that this sector is really saturated with, thousands of service providers doing necessary work on the front lines to make sure communities that have experienced historic disinvestment have access to basic amenities, and we need them to continue to be supported. We need them to be invested in, right? But as we think about this work and as we think about what are the levers to collective Black wealth, it's a long-term game. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And what we're really charged to do is to undo the harms of systemic racism, but also be bold enough to reimagine new realities. So Alex, I'd love to hear from you when you think about the moment. And when you think about what it means to really dream about collective Black wealth, what do you see as the role of policy and research in helping to facilitate that agenda?
Yeah, big question, but one that I, think about a lot. So, actually, I'll reflect on my career again. So, I came into the world of work focused on education policy, and I thought, that would be a great area to really make a change in lots of people's lives. I worked for a local school district and did government affairs work for the district. Spent a lot of time learning the ropes on how to engage with policymakers in that process. And it was intimidating, but I caught on quick. And also did some research on behalf of the district to inform some of the testimonies, some of the policy recommendations that we would put forth. And I got to see in real time what it took to get to the adoption of some of those rule changes, policy changes, and more. And some of the material benefits of those changes meant things like, fewer kids had, limited options for food. More kids in the schools had greater achievement scores, increased funding for educational services, transportation, things like that. So just being exposed to the power of both research and legislative advocacy was really important for me and early on in my career. But then I realized, the education system is just one of many different systems, and there's a very peculiar relationship between education and economic security.
Absolutely.
And so I jumped out of the education realm to a bit of a broader space focused on economic security issues. And I mean, many different economic security issues. I thought one of the underlying problems with educational outcomes being poor was the issue of poverty. Yeah. And so, you and I actually did work to address poverty in communities throughout Southwest Atlanta for some years. And we also thought about different approaches to support both parents and students. We did work primarily in workforce development, and that inspired me to spend a few years trying to make a connection between jobs and economic mobility.
Right.
And, over time, I realized after doing the research in that space and after being both a bit of a practitioner and as a philanthropist in that space, you start to question whether or not there actually going to be any material benefit in terms of addressing broader wealth disparities and even racial disparities at large. But I kept on with it, and as the years went on, I kept questioning kind of the role of jobs and income and earnings, and quickly realized that, it took a step back. The scope of the problem that we're facing is far more severe than what the majority of these programs, the many different direct service nonprofits, et cetera, are actually providing services to address. And so, for instance, the racial wealth divide is severe, right? I think I'm comfortable saying that this is something that I don't know if we would be able to close or completely address in my lifetime, but so few investments go into the work necessary to address it, or at least to narrow it. Yeah. And so once you get a handle on the scope of the issue and how significant the racial wealth gap is in this country, you really start to question, well, maybe it's not job training. Maybe it's not just, a K through 12 education, bootstrapping my way through the traditional pathways. Maybe it's about really disruptive structural reform to our economic systems, to, questioning capitalism and things like that, that are necessary to really move the needle on this issue. And so once you get into that space, you learn that there's actually limited research and policy and advocacy on actually tackling the racial wealth divide, because so much of the investment is in the direct service space. It's in helping people find jobs, helping people move up the economic ladder through poverty programs, which are all important and really necessary, and I still support and do work in that space. But the issue of building Black wealth rises to the top whenever you really grasp the scope of the problem and the lack of investment in that area. So you wouldn't really grasp that if you don't have insight into the research, the data, and you're not familiar with the policy landscape that actually led to the challenges that we're facing today.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I really appreciate that perspective, Alex, for so many reasons. And, you know, one of the things that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, particularly as we think about this time, is just the moment we're in, right? We've seen there have been several Supreme Court rulings in the past couple of months that have affected so many communities that have been locked out historically of the economic mainstream. We've seen the most recent ruling on Fairless Fund, and we see that these rulings occur, but they're going to really create significant disproportionate impact for Black people, Black livelihood of Black communities, Black families. And so when you think about this macro landscape where we need to invest in policy and research, share some of the counter narratives and some of the strategies that Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative is advancing, and how could we really inspire and challenge policymakers, practitioners, and philanthropists alike to really invest in creating outcomes that fundamentally change the odds for Black people and Black communities.
So what's critical about our work is that it's race explicit. And the cases that you mention are a result of race explicit solutions that people, policymakers, coalitions, et cetera, have tried to put forth to address centuries of discrimination, segregation in our markets, in our financial markets, in education, and even in employment and in housing. And so, you know, it's interesting that we've reached a point in time where, you know, we're supposedly in a period of time where, you know, things are supposed to be getting better. We're not in the Jim Crow South as we were several decades ago, that we are deciding to basically walk back all of our promises to create this meritocracy, this equal society and things like that. And we're using the courts to do that, right? It's interesting. But our work at AWBI is race explicit. Like, we're very clear. Our mandate is to build Black wealth, full stop. And, you know, it takes a lot of courage, and one of our values as an organization is courage. But it takes a lot of courage to be full-throated in that commitment to building Black wealth. And what gives us the courage is the data. It's the research. It's the history. It's understanding the policy. Like, we know that we did not come here by mistake. That's right. Right? We didn't know that this was an accident. This was a very intentional design, this racial wealth divide that we're experiencing. We know that through the course of enslavement, through the course of Jim Crow South, through the Black codes, you know, this is all the makeup of the conditions that we're currently existing in. And any attempt to dismiss that or to act like it's not real, or, you know, to act like, you know, that's not part of how we came to be, is just, it's ahistorical. And so we need willing partners to like lean into that courage as well, to be aligned with us around the truth, because we're in a moment where the truth is being completely washed away. But we lean heavily on data to help inform how we address Black wealth in particular. I will say some of the challenges that we experience is that because of systemic racism, there's actually limited data sets available that we can tap into to help tell that story. So what do? We actually situate our insights, or at least organize alongside community, to collect stories and get data from our resident allies and many others to inform some of our research as well. So we have to look at all these unconventional ways to develop research insights to help back up our case for why building Black wealth in particular is important. And it's quite ridiculous when you think about, like, why do we even have to justify this, understanding that we've had centuries of disenfranchisement in this country. There are, quite frankly, you know, explicitly racist and coded laws on the books to this day that don't allow Black folks to transcend beyond economic injustice. And yet we're ignoring the fact that, you know, there are great and deep disparities in this country. And I think it really shows its head whenever you talk to leaders in our space, nonprofit leaders, policymakers, and others, and they've yet to grasp the gravity of the issue,
That's right.
the scope of the issue. I mean, the median net worth of Black folks in this country is 0, and it's getting worse. The white net worth for white Atlantans is 46 times what it is for Black Atlantans. It's egregious. Those data points aren't enough, though. It's not enough to move people. So we do have to organize, but we also have to tell the right stories, and we gather a lot of those counter narratives from the people that we organize with and talk to on a daily basis. I was talking to somebody today, and in a focus group, and she was from Atlanta. She's Atlanta born and raised, and she made the point today that, you know, despite doing her very best, doing all the things, going to school, getting a good job, trying to buy a home, she feels like she's in quicksand. And that was the best metaphor that I've heard in a long time about what it's like trying to move up the economic ladder in a place that is the #1 place for income inequality, Atlanta, Georgia. So that, to me, is data. That's research, and that is, you know, informing our strategies and solutions at AWBI.
Alex, that's a really insightful response. And, you know, I fully agree with it. And, you know, as I think about the challenges around the data piece, I also see it as an opportunity. Because so many times the way we think about research and evaluation, it actually mimics very extractive practices that neglect community voices, community input. And so we have an opportunity to actually rewrite the equation, right? We have an opportunity to really say, let's interrogate what the baseline should be. And I think the manifesto begins to actually tease this idea out that we recently released, right? Our manifesto says, yes, the racial wealth divide is a really important issue. And let's talk about how we focus on building collective Black wealth. And we're using Black wealth, collective Black wealth, as our baseline, which is actually going to inspire a different type of methodology around what are we doing, how well are we doing it, and what difference are we making. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to consider that. You know, one of the things, particularly on the policy and research space, is it's so easy to be very fixated on let's write research papers on how our city's doing or how our region's performing or what's the national state of XYZ. And this really follows very descriptive models. But we rarely pay as much attention to the money. And we need to follow the money, right? And for us, you know, I'm really excited about looking at research and policy where we look at capital, public dollars, private dollars, and how they are bolstering more equitable economic outcomes, and where they do actually create harm, because there is a shared accountability conversation. And so the moment and the magic of this is the intent to distract us from the prize creates an opportunity for us to create a meaningful one. And I'm really excited to be part of a team, part of a network, part of a broader movement, really focused with complete solidarity on building Black wealth.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, one of the things I'd love to, you know, talk about is a lot of people are like, yes, I get what AWBI is doing and Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative is doing, and this work is really important, but why Black wealth? Why Black, right? And then I get questions like, Janelle, you have this accent. Like, are you tell me what you mean when you say this Black wealth. And we've had these conversations as a team. That's like, right, yeah. Blackness is a tapestry of so many things, right? But there's also a reason why we need to consider Black wealth and what it looks like and what the data points, both traditional data and what we hear from not too far from us, or family or friends or neighbors. So I'd love your thoughts around this moment that we're really trying to leverage into a movement around building collective Black wealth, and what inspires you about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think that our perception or understanding of why we focus on Black wealth, it's going to change over time. For me, my understanding of how Black folks have been treated in this country is the reason why I'm so dedicated to building Black wealth in particular. And what I mean by that is I know that this country, this country's leaders and the most powerful folks in this country have enriched themselves off the backs of Black folks in particular, right? In fact, being born and raised in the South, I know that it was through free exploited Black labor that this economy came to exist. And it would not exist without it. And so the consequences of that are we now have basically reinforced an underclass of Black folk, and reified and created the racial wealth gap, or the racial wealth divide. Excuse me. I don't intend to use the term gap because it was not naturally caused. It was intentionally created. And so understanding that history, and positions us to understand that, given the extreme levels of exploitation that Black folks have faced and continue to face, it gives us, I think, the credibility to focus squarely on Black folks as the main metric. But also, we're not naive. And so we know that there are other populations that are going to benefit from our work. Yeah. And so we're clear that focusing on building Black wealth is not excluding all other types of wealth or all other people.
I really appreciate those points, Alex. And we've emphasized this many, many times, that, being race explicit doesn't mean race exclusive. And fundamentally, when we focus on people and places that experience chronic disinvestment, we fundamentally help everyone. Our commitment to building Black wealth ensures a stronger economy and an actual democracy, right? And so many people think, focusing on just this particular population only helps that population. But again, as you said, right, adopting this target universalism approach, when we invest in those that have actually been denied access to opportunity, we invest in all of us. And so it's a really important approach.
I mean, there's that, but there's also the wealth divide is the greatest for Black folks.
It is.
So that's, that's really where it is. I mean, I agree. Like, we do have to make some compelling cases, right? Because we talk to different audiences and we need to have buy-in from folks that won't typically be in this journey with us. But fundamentally, I always have to remind folks that,
the data
is
very clear.
Very clear.
The data is extremely clear and has always been part of the conscience of this organization. Yeah. And it's kept us honest, and this is why we talk about like marrying truth with data, so that we're really intentional about executing our vision with integrity, and in a defensible way. So that's really important. And so, as we think about these concepts and the role of policy and research and how that shows up as well, I will say this transcends actually geographic boundaries, because we see the stings of, chattel slavery still manifested through, colonization. We still see it in former colonies and who has access to opportunity. We still see it, absolutely, mass incarceration. I think 90% of people that have been arrested in the state of Georgia lived below federal poverty level at a time of arrest. So this is really around an attempt to really continue to keep people out of the economic mainstream. And so for us, this work is so important. And it really prompts a broader question around, which we get all the time, like, why focus on Black wealth? Because we have a lot of Black folk living in poverty. Why Black wealth? Why that matters? And so I'd love to really kick off with, like, why does Black wealth matter? And why is it okay? And could we just normalize being comfortable with the words Black and wealth, and dare I say collective, in one sentence? So let's talk about that a bit, like Black wealth and why it matters. And it's okay for us to really support strategies that help more Black people be decision makers fundamentally and create communities that they want to see.
Yeah. So right off the bat, wealth begets wealth.
That's right.
Number one, numero uno. Second to that, If we focus on just lifting families above the federal poverty line, then if you look at the vast array of studies, evaluations, et cetera, you find that most of those families cycle back into poverty.
Yep.
And so what
That's right.
we've unfortunately been grappling with, and also at the same time been investing heavily in, are a lot of programs and services that, quite frankly, aren't successful at creating generational wealth that can be passed on from family to family, from generation to generation. And so I would say that's another reason. In terms of collective Black wealth, we have Black billionaires, right? We know that there is wealth concentrated in the Black community in certain places, but it's not shared widely, right? Yeah. And so Atlanta's a great example. It's a perfect case study because we have a great concentration of Black wealth in Atlanta, but only among a certain few.
That's right.
And so if you actually look at the data, you will find that, like I said, Black folks have the gravest wealth disparity in the city. And, number one in the region, in the Southeast.
That's right.
And so I think that, focusing on collective Black wealth also gets at some of the inherent challenges of creating concentrated wealth within the Black community, which is not helpful for long-term prosperity for Black folks. So I think, those are the reasons why.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, this hits on a point around Black exceptionalism. Mm-hmm. And,
I know you wanted to go there.
I have to go there. That's my tagline. It's probably one of my favorite lines in the manifesto around really making a commitment to transcend Black exceptionalism. Yep. And that doesn't mean we don't celebrate Black excellence. But what we do know is that outliers are still woefully insufficient. Yep. It's great that we have outliers, but we want to see the mean change. We want to change the margins, and we want to see a concentration of people in place, creating communities, policies, and economic opportunities that fundamentally benefit them, right? And so this is such an important part and shift around how we want to think about this work, how we want to engage with our partners, how we want to learn, and how do we appreciate the existing assets that are here to really bolster stronger economies and thriving communities. So as we think about transitioning from this session and our series, Black Wealth Unlocked, I would always like to close off by asking every guest, what does Black wealth mean to you? And this is not an academic question or a gotcha question, right? Yep. Because Black wealth it's a diverse thing. It's a dynamic thing, right? Mm-hmm. And we talk about it deep tapestry of Blackness already. So in your own words, Alex, what does Black wealth mean to you?
Yeah. In its simplest terms, I would say it's freedom, it's liberation. And even to go further, Black wealth to me, and really my definition of wealth in general, is about time. Like the freedom to be able to move throughout space and time without restriction, without constraints, without worrying, I'm in between jobs. I need to be able to go to the doctor. I need to get my teeth fixed. I need to get my car fixed. Having those concerns, living without that, and then also having to deal with the stress, the physical and the mental stress, the tolls that takes on your body. Yeah. Being able to be free from that is what wealth means to me. There are actual documented studies that address or at least look at the role of economic precarity, poverty, and mental health, right? Yeah. We know that the trauma caused from being in constant economic and financial distress can lead to death, right? And Black folks already have quite concerning lifetime expectancy outcomes. And so, that relationship between economic security and wealth and our ability to live is something that we certainly don't take it lightly at AWBI, and it's part of why we focus more broadly on wealth issues, not just on entrepreneurship or homeownership, but even looking at the connection between the culture of health and wealth.
Yes, civic infrastructure,
et cetera.
And the environment.
And the environment, climate, healthcare. But to be clear, that relationship, is about being able to live freely.
That's right.
Without limitation, without restriction. So I have no desire to be a billionaire. I'm going to be very clear. More money, more problems. That's not my ministry. But I do want to live freely. I want my family to live freely. I want my future kids, generations, etc., to be able to just move without restriction in this world and be free.
I love that. And, what you're really saying at a very human and honest level is it's about power, the ability to determine your reality, like in the words of Glenn Harris from Race Forward. And so when I think about powers in its simplest form, the ability to determine reality, wealth gives you power. And that's important.
That's right.
Thank you for joining us in today's session of Black Wealth Unlocked. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Janelle Williams, co-founder and CEO of Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, a dynamic nonprofit focused on building collective Black wealth. We'd also like to invite you on November 1st to join us for our inaugural launch of our Beloved Economy report focused on building Black wealth in Atlanta at noon. Please check out our website, atlantawealthbuilding.org, to learn more. Connect, commit, and contribute to the movement. Thank you.